So you got the best of both worlds in my mind. He's going toe-to-toe with private developers, holding them accountable, but then at the same time reflecting the will of the community to build what they want to see built in their neighborhood. And we're ruffling a few feathers with that. We're causing some disruption, a little bit of grumbling, because it's a new model in Detroit and, a little bit radical. And I'm pretty excited about that.
That's the voice of Josh Elling. Today's conversation focuses on transforming a community and creating economic opportunities while not leaving those who never left behind. What if the profits from community development went towards funds for, say, neighbors to help fix their roof? What if businesses hired within their communities so most of their employees walked to work and then paid them more than minimum wage? It turns out that can be a recipe for business success, too. To say the least, my colleague Sven Gustafson had a very interesting chat with Elling and Derric Scott. I'm Jer Stays. It's Thursday, September 12th, 2019, and this is Your Daily Detroit. This episode is brought to you by our members. Get on the bus and become one at dailydetroit.com/join, and thank you.
The community development nonprofit Jefferson East recently held a community workshop to solicit ideas for the future of the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood. That feedback is making its way into a master plan that will help guide the redevelopment of the Far East Side neighborhood and business district. And joining us to talk about it is Josh Elling, the CEO of Jefferson East Incorporated, and Derric Scott, CEO of East Jefferson Development Corporation, which is the for-profit, wholly owned subsidiary of Jefferson East that focuses on real estate development. Josh and Derric, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Good to have you here. All right. So, Josh, we had you on the old Happy Hour podcast. It was 2 years ago, almost to the day. And we were talking all about the East Riverfront, because you guys oversee basically from 75 all the way to the Grosse Pointe border along Jefferson. Back then, it seemed like the neighborhood was really hopping with development activity and plans and interest and everything. Still the case now?
Yeah, and I think, Jefferson East does do work up and down the entire East Jefferson corridor, from Alter Road to downtown, the river to Verner, safety, picking up the trash, housing support, all that good stuff. But, Jefferson Chalmers was where we were founded. Mm-hmm. And that has been where we've done planning work, where we've done facade projects. We got Norma G's out of the ground a few years ago, new Caribbean restaurant in our old office. But what we really noticed a few years ago was that while development was starting to happen in Lafayette Park and Rivertown and in West Village, it hadn't quite made it down to the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood. And so we kind of put together some initial planning work to revitalize that strip, but we quickly realized we had to do it in a different way. We couldn't just do it in the traditional nonprofit way of get a grant here or there, do a few buildings, kind of takes forever. We also wanted to sort of get ahead of development pressures that allowed us to build a neighborhood that was inclusive of the surrounding neighborhood, supported existing business owners and residents. And so we actually created a for-profit development subsidiary, East Jefferson Development Corporation, that allows us to basically go and develop properties that are in alignment with our inclusive development principles. And those profits, instead of being extracted to like a Bingham Farms or a Troy, they stay right in the community to flow back and support the work that Jefferson East did. So we kind of put that together, quickly realized I needed to hire someone that knew what the heck they were doing. So I got to know Mr. Derric Scott here, and we brought him on board in 2016 as the CEO of our development arm. And from there, Derric's really been able to take it to the whole next level and put together a portfolio of projects in Jefferson Chalmers. But we quickly realized that we had not been back in depth in front of residents in Jefferson Chalmers in several years. The last time we had done a full-blown sort of design plan and streetscape and all that was 2006. So I'll kind of let Derric take it from there and talk a little bit about how we got to the master planning process that we did a few weeks ago.
Derric.
Sure. So like Josh said, we quickly found ourselves, immersed in a ton of real estate that we had acquired over the last year and a half or so. And what we realized is that there was a need for refreshing that development strategy or plan that Josh referenced that dated back to 2016 and some community engagement that dated back to 2013. And so we had a strong sense of the what And we said that we needed to figure out the how now. And so what I mean by that is the what was, clearly defined by, we know what the assets are. We know what the market study says. DGC had done a street sense study last year that we were heavily tied together with them on, that told us here's what we're missing from a market perspective, the type of leakage for where people are spending their money outside of the neighborhood, the types of businesses that the neighborhood could support, the dollars that we're leaving. And so we said, how can we start to identify businesses that are in our pipeline where we've got properties, we've got interest from active business owners and retailers through some of the partnerships we have with folks like TechTown, with identifying folks that want to be here. But with the limited amount of space, how do we prioritize who comes online first and gets access to that space? And so the way that we started to do that is really using two methods. One is saying, does the market study support it? And then secondly, is it something that the community wants to see? And once we are able to reconcile those two things, then we're able to kind of hit the ground running, doing all the kind of heavy lifting work with trying to figure out how to fill the financing gaps, how to make a deal actually work deep in the neighborhood, going after grant dollars and grant support. So this master planning process, which 2 weeks ago now, I guess we did this large engagement process with community members. We had about 120 members, 120 community members that turned out, which was really wonderful.
And it was like 3 days, right, at the end of August?
So it was across an entire week, which was a really unique process in that we brought everyone in on the first night to kind of lay out, like, here are the existing conditions, here are the properties, here's the context of what we're planning. And I think the thing that struck people and caught them off guard was the fact that we had not come in and said, here's our actual plan, here's what we're going to do, and we want you to respond to it. They were like, crap, you really haven't planned this all out, and what we say tonight actually will have some type of weight in what's actually done. We're like, yeah, that's exactly it. You're going to inform the strategy of what happens here. So over the course of the next few days, our planning consultants and team went to work with taking all the feedback that they had received on that Tuesday night, identifying some key development sites along Jefferson in the district, and now taking that community feedback and saying, here's what we heard, here are the key sites that we can begin to develop, and here are some of the major takeaways that we can begin to act on right away.
Yeah. When we talk about Jefferson Chalmers, how, because this is a defined neighborhood, how many blocks are we talking about, and how much property do you guys own over there now?
So within Jefferson Chalmers, the key study area it runs from right at Alter Road down to
the Grosse Pointe Park border,
which is right at Grosse Pointe Park. To the west, the border is Riverbend Shopping Center, which was really kind of the impotence of how Jefferson East, or JEVA at the time, was founded back in '94, was to get that shopping center built. Okay. And so that's the western boundary, and then kind of entails some city-owned property that'll go out to future RFP in the next year. And so really there's a micro district that runs from where Norma G's is, right at Manistee, and west to where that city-owned parcel is. And so what we, again, acquiring property, what we say is that we, in some way, form, or fashion, control, whether it's through direct ownership or through partnership with existing landowners, about 87% of the parcels that were within the study area.
You own 87%?
Either own or control through some type of development partnership.
Okay. So talk broadly, what are you trying to do in Jefferson Chalmers? What's the goal over there?
So whenever we're asked, what is the vision, or what are you guys looking to do? And the answer is, it's the community's vision. It's the community's desire to see the type of retail uses, the type of activity, the type of vibrance that they envision.
All right, that'll do it for this
neighborhood
episode of the podcast.
So at the end of the day,
Be sure
we're
to
really
tell a
the
friend
technicians
about
to
the
try to help
daily-
them execute on that.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast.
It's reducing
Be sure
vacancy,
to tell a friend about
along
your
the
daily
corridor,
Detroit.
filling it
and
with
let's push Detroit's
existing
conversation
businesses,
forward
or with
together.
new businesses.
Take care of
that
each other.
won't displace
and we'll see
existing
you
businesses
around Detroit.
And making sure that displacement of residents doesn't happen in the process, and that it buys in to what Josh was making reference to, all of our inclusive development principles. And so what that means is all of our projects, if you do business with us, you have to do local hiring from the neighborhood. So that means 51% or more of employees come from neighborhood, Jefferson Chalmers, or the 4 surrounding Detroit zip codes, and they're being paid higher wages.
Right.
So Norma G's, for example, a dishwasher at Norma G's, usually in the city they make minimum wage. There they started at $11.50, moved up to $13.50, and by the end of the year the idea is to have them at $15 an hour. So
great.
with 15 employees there, anywhere at any time, there's anywhere from 11 to 12 of those employees that walk to work every single day, which is a game changer for the neighborhood.
So one thing I'm curious about, Jefferson Chalmers is it's a challenged neighborhood economically. I mean, you alluded to the vacant storefronts there. The neighborhoods on both sides of Jefferson are, pretty rough shape. So when you're talking about redeveloping that business district, especially, how do you balance between because you talked about market studies and what the existing neighborhood can support. Obviously, you want it to be partly a district of businesses that serve the neighborhood, but you've also got to kind of try to make it a little bit of a destination type business district too. Like, how do you balance that? And what's the, how do you approach that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we said, during our engagement process with the community is that there's a little bit of a give and take, right? So in order to make some deals work, there's other deals that have to happen. And so where a lot of the tenants that we're putting in the projects, we're heavily subsidizing, and those are not what you would call a market deal. The rents are low. We're supporting a lot of the build out. And so to carry some of that weight, you do have to do some of those larger market deals where you have a regional draw or some type of attraction that gets people spending money in the community, gets people from outside the neighborhood that's coming in and making investments in the community as well. And so I think it's really painting that picture for the community to say, here are some of the trade-offs that it'll take to get to where we want to be, but then making sure that those folks that come in, that where we're doing a market deal, really buy into those inclusive development principles. And so I think that helps the community to accept some of those opportunities as they come in that may not necessarily be the first opportunity the community would have chosen, but they're doing the local hiring, they're doing local contracting. My cousin's swinging a hammer on that site, just hanging drywall. And so it's providing an opportunity for jobs in the community. And we see the direct impact that it's having here in our neighborhood.
Right. So can you give us any examples of some of the, kind of outside company, big names, destination sort of things that maybe you're talking with or that have plans to open up over there?
You want all the sweet information.
Well, of course.
So I can't say any names, in particular, is like some of those we're, still having conversations with. But what I can say is, from the list, there's many folks that we've had conversations with where, sometimes a community member may throw out a name of a large entity that you would have once thought that they would never have considered, right? And that entity comes in, you meet with them, and they're not necessarily buying into inclusive development principles. And so while, it'd be great to put their name on a sign and say, hey, we've got big box tenant A that's going into this site, they don't necessarily ascribe to the community principles. And so for us, even as we identify some of those big folks, you may be surprised at some of the names that come through the pipe because they're not the typical folks you would think of in the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
I think if I could add, and one of the things that's interesting, getting back to the balance you have to do there is if you even go back to the history of the neighborhood, right? You have the Vanity Ballroom, you have the Monticello Ballroom. The Vanity Ballroom was a big national act. The Monticello Ballroom was a local act. There was this long history of having both the destination, the locally serving retail there. And I think residents sort of understand that. They know that they can't just serve, it's got to be reflective of their needs and desires, but it's got to have a broader draw to make the economics work. I think Norma G's is a great example of that. If you go into Norma G's on any given night, you're going to see people that are coming across from the Grosse Pointes, coming in from downtown, but also the good portion of the folks there that walked up from the surrounding neighborhood or came down from Morningside or that. I think the other thing that I found fascinating was when you looked at some of the preliminary results that came back from the engagement process that we did in the planning process, there were things that both residents and visitors would enjoy, like, wanting to have a movie theater, wanting to have a grocery store. I think what Derric's getting to now the artistry of this now is to go out to those types of firms, make our case and kind of say, look, residents want this type of service. We know the data supports it. But you have got to sort of buy into these other things that residents have said they want, like local hiring. So that I think is going to be where we're really going to be working over the next year. The other option is obviously, we've been fortunate that we own the Vanity Ballroom. How that gets repurposed as both a neighborhood asset, but also it's something that really raises the profile of the business district. That's one of the other project sites we're kind of working through to fine-tune proposals with the planning process that the teams are still putting together ideas and concepts for.
Okay. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that Vanity Ballroom project, because I actually know somebody who went to the community workshop, and he doesn't live in the neighborhood, but he was telling me about it. And he was like, well, I was talking to a lot of people who live in the neighborhood, and they were a little skeptical about the ability to redevelop the Vanity Ballroom, because they're like, it's from another era. Like, we don't have dance halls and things like that now. That's not what people do. I mean, so, you wouldn't be looking for like a like-to-like reuse there necessarily. Right.
Well, I think one of the unique things about the Vanity Ballroom in buildings like that, it's sort of timeless, right? So the Vanity Ballroom's 30,000 square feet, 15,000 on first and second story. So the first floor was all retail. And so that, while I won't say it won't be an easy fill, filling that with retail in the right mix that can activate the first floor of the Vanity Ballroom is probably a little easier than thinking about what the use of the second floor, the actual old ballroom is. But one of the things we heard really clearly was that community members want to continue to see that remain accessible to the public and accessible to community members, is activated in a way that it really pays homage to the history of the use of the Vanity Ballroom. And so one of the ways that we're looking to do that is, restoring the ballroom floor, restoring a lot of the original fixtures in there. There's some great Aztecian mosaics and details that are all throughout the ballroom, some great plaster work that's in there. And so being able to bring it back to life in a way that both pays homage to the history of it built in the 20s, but then also brings it to the present of having it activated. But we also say this because there's two histories of the Vanity Ballroom. And, Josh alluded to this. The Vanity was kind of the big acts, the major acts, and the Monticello Ballroom was, more local acts.
And the Monticello no longer exists? Is that
It's still there. It's currently, there's some retail on the ground floor, but the upstairs ballroom is not currently being utilized. This is the ballroom that is just east
to the east, about 2 blocks east of the Vanity.
Okay.
And so for a lot of folks that grew up in this area and knew the two ballrooms, they would also tell you that the Vanity Ballroom was the whites only ballroom and the Monticello was the coloreds ballroom. And so to bring back the history of the Vanity may not have the same meaning for different groups of people.
Right.
And so it's being able to activate that in a way that it salutes the history of the Vanity, but also at the same time gives people access to such a treasure.
Right. Because most of the people, frankly, living over there nowadays probably they don't have memories of the Vanity for that very reason. They were barred from going in. Yeah.
The other thing that I think was different, and this came up during the master planning process, someone said to me, why is this different than we were together in 2006 or 2013? And I said, the simple answer is EJDevCo. I think what we've been able to put together with having a development arm with a great deal of talent on it that has access to different types of financing than just a Jefferson East would have is allowing us to actually execute on these projects now. And to me, I told them, I hate doing planning for planning's sake, even though I have a master's in urban planning, right? I want to plan with a purpose. And so so this master planning process will lead to people will see renovation of different retail buildings. They'll see retailers going into it relatively quickly. But you're right, the larger projects, the Vanity Ballroom, the parcel 492 that Derric referenced, these larger projects will take longer, and we've got to put our brains together about some other economic development tools, some other strategies. But I think the main difference now is having something like EJDevCo, the talented team that Derric has put together, is going to be able to drive a lot of these projects. That's something we didn't have in that neighborhood for a long time, and so we're thrilled to be able to bring that on the ground there and move some of those buildings along pretty quickly.
You said that EJDevCo, if I'm using the slang correctly, brings access to new kinds of financing tools. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what exactly are we talking about?
Sure. So I won't necessarily say that it's new financing tools as much as, it gives us an opportunity to think creatively about how we use tools that are out there that may or may not have one time been accessible. So nonprofits, are sometimes limited by the resources and a lot of times rely on other developers or other development partners. And what usually happens is the nonprofit partners with for-profit developer, and the nonprofit's expected to bring a whole lot of grant money. That's free money that comes to the deal, and then ultimately, the value is extracted out of the community. And once the deal is done, there's really no value for having the nonprofit, and they're left kind of holding, the bag of all these other things and activities and services that there's still a gap in. And so one of the things that EJDevCo is created to do is both think about how we address financing gaps. So whether it's going out and leveraging special finance districts or special financing tools that may be available to us, but then also creating this conduit of revenue that can continue to flow back to the nonprofit that can continue to support a lot of the other services, such as, like Josh said, the clean and safe work, the mobility work, making sure that homeowners can actually stay in their homes around where these developers are happening, and supporting homeowners with resources to make sure there's not displacement that happens as a result of development that we're doing. So I think it's more than just like thinking through creative finance solutions for projects, but creating a system of sustainability for the neighborhood itself.
It also opens up opportunities to do, access different philanthropy differently. I mean, so Derric, what happens now, we can get grant dollars, we can invest that grant dollar into EJDevCo, becomes an equity investment into deals. And so there's always a return that flows back on that. Yeah. Vase is basically just giving a grant to a private developer. They're like, thank you. Thanks a lot, little nonprofit. We'll take it from here. See you later. And then you're back raising money to fund your home repair program or your roof program every year, right? Mm-hmm. This will build that revenue stream for JI to do all that work. The other thing is in philanthropy, there's been a big shift to do things like program-related investments or mission-related investments that can flow from major foundations. To have this construct set up with EJDevCo allows us to access those types of investments into real estate deals in a way that a nonprofit wouldn't be able to do just in and of itself. So it's much more flexibility, but I think there's also something a little bit different. There's the ethos of Derric and his team have been put together in that it's the best of both worlds. It's best of sort of the community interface of nonprofit with the hard driving ethos of a private developer. So you got the best of both worlds in my mind. He's going toe to toe with private developers, holding them accountable, but then at the same time reflecting the will of the community to build what they want to see built in their neighborhood. And we're ruffling a few feathers with that. We're causing some disruption, a little bit of grumbling, because it's a new model in Detroit, and a little bit radical. And I'm pretty excited about that. And so stay tuned. You're going to see a lot more from EJDevCo over the next couple of years.
All right, we will definitely. So what did you hear from the residents who came out to the workshop and offered up their ideas? Like what sort of creative ideas did you hear that are likely to make it into the master plan?
Well, first I should say that like the residents in the neighborhood are very creative and intelligent folks, and I think the ideas that they brought to the table, they weren't surprising. Some of them were like some ideas, like some folks were like, we want to see a Whole Foods, we want to see a Trader Joe's, we want to see these type of retail mixes that we've heard people in the past say, well, they don't folks don't want a Whole Foods in their neighborhood. They don't want a Trader Joe's there. They don't want this type of use. But we did also hear things like, we want to see an Aldi. We want to see a range of price points. I want to be able to have access to the certain amenities that I travel outside of my neighborhood to see. We want to see things like a movie theater, which kept popping up. There were also a lot of folks that, hit home about the point that we have a lot of seniors in our community that are aging. And so having recreational activities for seniors and things that they can, still be a part of the neighborhood as it grows, and that they're not both priced out of the neighborhood, but also planned out of the neighborhood from the type of uses that come in. And so, I think the big takeaway for us was that, the community was a lot more open to different ideas that, we could begin to explore from the perspective of thinking creatively of the type of tenants we bring in, but then also of the types of uses that they would support that we otherwise was not thinking of. So I think the feedback ultimately was pretty positive.
Yeah, and I just say to your viewers too. I mean, they can, or your listeners, forgive me, listeners.
It looks like a TV.
They can plug in
now. I know that.
They can plug in. They can go to like www.buildingjctogether.com, and they can actually see the responses that people have given. And it was really fascinating to sort of to look through those and see what they're saying. But to Derric's point, this neighborhood is no stranger to planning, and I think our big job now is to execute, and I think we're going to do that, and so I think that's what makes it different. But yeah, there were a lot of unique things that came up. I mean, at least Derric said, from a Whole Foods down to a food co-op.
Yeah.
So a wide range of options to explore, and so it's going to be really interesting to see as we continue to refine the product, come back to residents here when we get the final product done here in about a month or so.
Okay,
and look at it.
And so you get the final master plan comes in a month or so. What's next in the process, and I guess when can people expect to start seeing shovels in the ground, so to speak, and
Yeah, so the good news
progress.
is, we currently have some projects that are under construction. So we're really excited about Alma Kitchen, which will be opening in the next few months, right on the corner of Jefferson and Lakewood. And so that's
a Mexican
Asian soul fusion concept. That's
really
wonderful. The owners there are former executive chef for the Muir Group and McCormick and Schmitz, and so no stranger to the kitchen, and so bringing some really nice concepts to the neighborhood. So we'll see projects like that begin to come online, and then some of the projects that are being prioritized out of the plan, which we're identifying 5 to 6 roughly, in the next year to 3 years, you'll see those start to take shape, with us saying, hey, here are the priorities. Here are the ones we can start to move into construction right away, begin to finalize some of the financing package on it. And ultimately, you'll see us identify some tenants here very quickly, based on the feedback that we've got from the master planning process. So I think the ongoing steps are, once the plan is refined next month, we'll have monthly check-ins with the community, both to say, hey, here's where we are, with existing projects and future projects, but here's also what we heard from the planning process, and here are some users, right? We heard you wanted a coffee shop, so here are some particular users that may fit that need, and let's have you vet out who's the best user and who's the right person to be here, whether it's a Starbucks or is it the neighborhood group that's looking to have the neighborhood locally based coffee shop.
And one thing I was just going to say that we haven't touched on is, and I know it's a big area of opportunity that you guys have identified, is new housing, right?
Right. Yeah.
A lot of plans for that.
Yeah, there's a two-prong approach. I mean, obviously, through EJDevCo and some partnerships, we have some units of affordable and market rate under construction there on Marlboro, looking for other options to build more affordable housing. But that was a key thing that came out of the planning process. Residents were very concerned to make sure that any new housing is affordable to the surrounding community. And so having that deeply affordable at 30, 50, 60% AMI, not just hitting the city's minimum, but going deep beyond that. And that's core to EJDevCo and JEI's inclusive development principles. The other thing, which is more of the JEI side of the house, is us really playing a much more active role on top of what we're doing in helping residents remain in their single-family home. So the home repairs, the foreclosure prevention, developing a roof fund. You've got residents who have stuck it out there for 40, 50 years, and we want to make sure they can enjoy all the new amenities that are going to be on Jefferson Avenue. So look for us to be a lot more active on the single-family housing support over the next year as well, too. With any luck, we'll have our new housing resource center right behind Alma Kitchen there in the building at Lakewood and Jefferson. So it's got to raise a little bit more money for that, but we'll get that cooking.
All right, very cool. Well, we look forward to keeping our eyes on what you guys are doing, and good luck with everything. Josh Elling, CEO of Jefferson East, and Derric Scott, Jefferson East Jefferson Development Corporation CEO. Thanks, guys, for coming in.
All right,
Thanks for having us.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. Be sure to tell a friend about your Daily Detroit, and let's push Detroit's conversation forward together. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.